We started this new series last week out of the book of Luke, chapter 15. We kind of tapped into our Redmond campus, and we streamed the service, and Pastor Ben started a series called All for the One out of Luke 15. If you have a Bible, you can go there. If you don't have a Bible, it's in your program, and of course, it'll be on the screen behind me. But in Luke 15, it tells a story of Jesus telling these three parables, or these three stories. And really, these three stories show us what Jesus is all about. At his very core nature, what makes Jesus tick, right? If we can naturalize Jesus for a second. Luke 15 gives this beautiful description of what Jesus really cares most about. And I think that if you want to know the heart of God, you look at Luke chapter 15. I think that if we chew on these three stories, we meditate on these three stories, we get this incredible picture of who Jesus is, who God is. And it doesn't necessarily show us all of God, but it paints this incredible picture of the redemption process. At the core of all this, of everything that we're doing, the redemptive story is the baseline. It's the jumping point. It revolves, everything revolves around this storyline. Last week we focused on the first story that Jesus tells, where he talks about how in the same way a shepherd would leave his 99 sheep to go find the lost one. Heaven celebrates more when one person comes into salvation than 99 people who don't need repentance. Heaven is going to rejoice over the one that's lost coming home more than the 99 that don't need salvation. A few weeks ago, I was out doing some grocery shopping. I do all the grocery shopping in our home. It's not commendable. I require it. Like maybe, I don't know, year one of our marriage, Shayna came home with flaxseed, and I said, "You're done." It's not commendable that I do all the grocery shopping. I have control issues. I'm currently seeing somebody in counseling around my grocery shopping issues. Shayna does everything else, and I do the grocery shopping, right? Probably 99.5%. And so a few weeks I'm out doing the grocery shopping, and if I can let you in a little bit further, I have issues doing it all at once. Is anybody like that? Like, you can't do all your grocery shopping at the same time. It's not like a time thing. It's because you are just incapable of doing it all at once. My thing is that I would rather spend, $400 over the course of a month than in the same day. And $400 is a random, I literally have no idea what groceries cost. I really don't. Like, I'm assuming it's around $400 for my family. What's cool about it is, like, every 3 days my kids go hungry because I didn't make it back to the grocery store. I know it's not financially responsible to do it like every 2 or 3 days, but I just require that, okay? So I'm just setting this up for you, okay? So I'll go grocery shopping in a few weeks, and like most shoppers, I have to spread it out, right, between stores. You can't get everything at the same store, right? Right? You have to spread it around. Do you hear that echo? Do you, I don't know. Just start moving things until it's gone. So I spread myself out, right? I'm not a couponer. Anybody couponers? Is that a thing? Is that what we call them? Okay, 2 of you. The rest of you need to start saving money on your groceries. As do I. As I just said, I don't use coupons. So I spread myself out because you can't get everything at one store, right? Some stores just don't have it, or it's more expensive, and you just got to spread it out. It's just the nature of shopping. So a few weeks ago, I was shopping, I'm spreading it out, and I land at Walmart. Okay, you can't get everything at Walmart, but you can get some things at Walmart. So I'm at Walmart, I'm in the self-checkout, I'm ringing things up like I always do, I'm a pro at it. We used to have this game when we'd go grocery shop. Sometimes I would allow Shayna to come with me. And I stopped that too, because one time she knocked that flaxseed in there. I said, "No, you're done." So we used to have this game where I would guess the price of the groceries. I could guess your price of your groceries within $1 every time. Like, it's freaky weird, right? So anyway, that's just an extra tidbit for you. So I'm in the self-checkout, and I'm standing there, and I see this little girl, and she's crying. And not like a little crying, like she is sobbing. And she's walking around, you see the track mark of the tear in her dirty cheek. And she's walking around, she's crying, and I think, okay, why is no one doing anything? So I look around, I kind of scan the room, and I'm looking for, a parent nearby that maybe just wasn't really paying attention, or the girl just got in trouble, and so she's crying because she's got yelled at, and I couldn't find anything. I didn't see a parent, whatever else. So I think, all right, you're up, right? Let's go save the day. So I slowly approached this girl like a wild animal, right? I mean, I was slowly approaching this girl for two reasons. Number one, I didn't want to spook her. Number two, I didn't want to be the kidnapper in the story, right? So I see this girl crying, and I'm like slowly approaching this girl, like keep an eye on her so she doesn't get stolen. But I'm slowly approaching her because in my head I just picture this conversation, this interaction with a lady, the store manager, and the police as they're describing my very person walking off with this girl. Right? So I slowly approached this girl. Unfortunately, I was cut off by another hero as I let out this long sigh of relief. And this elderly lady goes over and she kneels down and asks the girl if she needs help. And I'm relieved because, I love kids, but I do way better with my own kids. Your kids are great. I love your kids. But if me and your kid are in too long of a conversation, it's bound to get really awkward. True story. Just watch sometime. You're all standing in the corner, and I'm just like awkwardly talking to your child. So this lady gets in, and she saves the day, whatever. And it was good for her. And I kind of stood back, and I watched the interaction happen, and I waited to see, what happened with her. But I knew that in that moment of me self-checking out at the grocery store, that my sole purpose on earth was to save this girl, right? That day, my sole purpose on earth was to ensure that this girl found her parents. That's my purpose for the day. That's a purpose for my life. Yesterday, my purpose was to finish the office for the 19th time. But today is to find this little girl's parents, right? And I watched it, and the dad eventually showed up, and she had wandered off at some point, and the dad was kind of frantically running around trying to find her. The girl was basically the most famous person in the store. No one cared about my efforts at that point. Like, it's all about her now. And her dad came, and she was found, whatever. The cool thing about what we find in these stories that Jesus tells is that he's not necessarily like a teacher that's grading us. He's not somebody that's trying to catch us in the act so we get in trouble. He's like this dad that's lost the child. He's like this dad that the kid has wandered away from his cover and his protection and his guidance and his direction. And Jesus is not grading us. He's trying to find us. He's trying to bring us back in. Maybe you're new to church or you just started your faith journey. You'll find that this entire book that we call the Bible is one long story of redemption. It's one long story of Jesus trying to find the lost child. It's one long story, and all of them point up like this at Jesus, of us getting back to him, us getting back to where we should be, of us getting redemption and salvation. Maybe you're not new to church. Maybe you've called Jesus a friend your entire life or for years. Let this be a revitalization. Let this be encouragement. Let this be a reminder of what your goal and your purpose on this planet are to do. Still with me? Because just as the Father does, I believe that we are to do the same. Because every person has a story, and every story matters to Jesus. Right? Every person has a story, and every story matters to Jesus. So in the book of Luke, he's writing his account of the life of Jesus. Jesus lived for 33 years. Luke took a book of the Bible, and he wrote all about his life with Jesus, the things that he saw. And in Luke chapter 15, he's telling this story of this time that Jesus is speaking, and he tells these three parables, or these three stories. The chapter starts off by identifying the crowd that's sitting there. It says that sinners and tax collectors were sitting around Jesus. Sinners, and then even worse than sinners, tax collectors, right? They're the rough crowd. I love that Jesus has the attention of the very people he's trying to reach. Jesus is not necessarily surrounded by all of these wonderful Christians. He's surrounded by the people that he cares most about, that he's trying to reach. Remember, we talked about the ones that make Jesus tick. The one. right? Not the 99, the one. And he's surrounded by this group of ones, okay? Can you picture it in your head? Surrounded by all these ones, sinners and tax collectors. He's got this group of ones sitting around him, and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they begin to scoff at Jesus' company. And he begins telling the story of a shepherd losing the sheep, and then he goes on in verse 8. He gets to his second parable, and he says this. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you this. There is rejoicing in the presence of angels, in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. That's good stuff. Here's your key truth today. There's the first fill in the blank in your notes if you have them. Your key truth is this. God's primary business is redemption. Our key truth last week was that God's primary business is redemption. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. The key truth next week is God's primary business is redemption. And I'm going to give you even more spoiler alert. Every week from here on out, the key truth is that God's primary business is redemption. God is in the business of redemption. I'm going to talk about three concepts this morning, three simple concepts that we're going to find in that parable that we just read. The first one is this. God is a God that searches. God is a God who searches. Second one is that God is a God that finds. And then finally, God is a God that celebrates. God is a God that searches, and when he searches, he finds. And when he finds, he throws this huge party because of what just happened in his find. God throws this massive party all because of the one who has come home. Are you with me? All right, this is good stuff. This is good stuff. Get on my page, okay? That's what we find in these three parables that we're reading. That's what we find in Luke chapter 15. Up to this point, Jesus had this movement happening behind him. Crowds and crowds of people begin to follow Jesus. Jesus has this elevated name across the land because people are following him. Crowds and tons of people are coming to hear what Jesus has to say. And his favorite thing to talk about when he meets these crowds, when these crowds gathered around, was the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. He could not stop talking about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven being this one unified body of people all under submission to God. If every person on the planet submitted to God, we get the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus couldn't stop talking about it. He was constantly going on and on about the kingdom of heaven. But we hadn't reached it yet. So Jesus was telling people that I'm coming to restore the kingdom. My purpose on earth as Jesus is to come and restore the kingdom, that every knee would bow, that every tongue would confess that Jesus is God. And that was his thing. I'm here to take the world, and I'm here to save the world. And everywhere he went, he dropped these pockets of hope about the kingdom of heaven. He dropped these little pieces of hope that hope where there was previously despair, healing where there was previously pain and disease, purpose where formerly there was a lack of purpose, right? Joy where there was sadness. Jesus was constantly dropping these little bits of hope, all referring to this kingdom that he's going to eventually restore. And see, when Jesus taught people listened. When Jesus got in front of a crowd of people and talked, people listened. People were drawn in to Jesus. That's why we are so adamant about people showing up and walking through our doors at Timberlake, because we want to be pushing Jesus so much that people have no other option than to be drawn into it. Not because of a fantastic worship team or a kids ministry or a preacher or somebody welcoming at the door, but because the worship team is pushing Jesus so hard that the default is people being drawn in. That our kids ministry is pushing Jesus so hard that the default is it's drawing kids in. That the preacher is pushing Jesus so hard that people are being drawn in. Right? That the default is people being drawn in. All through Scripture, we see people being drawn in. We see it then and we see it now. Because that name of Jesus sucks people in. What's funny about it, though, is when you look at the crowds that Jesus always brought in, the crowds that were drawn in, that were attached to Jesus, they were always filled with two types of people. Here's your next fill in the blank. The first one is the scoffer. The scoffer. I don't even know if that's a word. I made it up and I did not look it up. Somebody's all Googling right now. Nope. So the first one's the scoffer. Jesus brought in the person that scoffed. The scoffer is this. It's the Pharisee. It's the religious leader. It's the person that was always countering Jesus. Jesus would come and he would teach, and there would be someone in the crowd that would be like, "You, sir, are wrong." They're the ones that always were pushing that we had to act our way into heaven. That we acted our way into heaven. They're the ones that were countering Jesus, and Jesus always had something to say. Sometimes Jesus handled the scoffer like we would expect the Son of God to handle him. And sometimes Jesus handled him like he should handle him. Right, let me give you an instance. Matthew 23 says this: "Therefore you are witnesses against yourself that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets." Is Jesus speaking to the scoffer? It's him speaking to the religious leader, the Pharisees. He says, "Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt." Okay, let me break that down. Jesus is looking at these people and he says, "Your fathers are the ones that killed the prophets. You need to be filled with guilt." Filled with guilt for that, right? I mean, could you imagine if somebody said that to you? Like, "Hey, I know about your dad's sin. You need to feel bad about it. I mean, you feel really, really bad about it." He goes on and says, "Serpents, brood of vipers." Okay, so you show up, and I'm like, "I know what your dad did." Brood of vipers, serpents, you horrible, horrible people. That's what Jesus is basically saying to these people. He says, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Sometimes Jesus expressed himself with love and kindness and gentleness. And sometimes he's like, "Man, you're going to have a hard time escaping hell." Right? That's how he talked to these scoffers. But the scoffers were always drawn in. The Pharisees were always drawn in. Any story that Jesus tells, or any depiction of Jesus in front of a crowd, there's always a Pharisee littered in there somewhere. The other type was the sinner. Jesus drew the scoffer, and Jesus drew the sinner. The sinner is the person that caught Jesus' eye. The sinner was the person that Jesus came for. The scoffer says, "Come prepared," and the sinner says, "Come as you are." And Jesus was a friend of the sinner. Jesus was a friend of the sinner. Can you hear me? Jesus was a friend of the sinner. See, I want to associate myself with the sinner because Jesus chooses to associate with me. Our life should be such a huge representation of Jesus that there are constantly people asking. Jesus drew people in. He drew the sinner in. So by default, when we have a relationship with Jesus, people should be drawn to us. People should be constantly asking us, right? Because we have Jesus in us, and our life is this representation of Jesus. And if Jesus draws people in, people should be drawn to us. People should be asking us. We should have a pull. So the Pharisees are rumbling because Jesus eats with sinners. The Pharisees' big problem was not necessarily that they had a lack of belief in God. It wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to obey God. It's that they focused on the one thing that would probably ruin them quicker than anything else. Pharisees were self-righteous. They were self-righteous. Their end result was the same as Jesus. They all wanted to get to heaven. What they were doing they thought was going to get them to heaven. They even wanted to take people with them to heaven. But their means to the end was wrong. Jesus had this means to the end, and the Pharisees had this one. So let's get back to the story that Jesus tells. He moves on to his second story. There's a woman. She's got 10 coins. She's got 10 coins, and she loses one. They say that the coins were worth about a day's wage each. day's wage each. Okay, so I did some research this week on the internet, and I discovered that the average day's wage in Cowlitz County, and we want to throw out a guess. What do you think it is? Wow, that would be great. It's $150, okay? $340 a day? That's a lot, Bart. $150 a day is what the day's wage is, okay? So she's got 10 coins, each one worth, let's just say $150 each, okay? So right off the bat, it's not a ton of money, but I'd take a spare $1,500. Okay, so she's got her money, and our assumption is this lady is most likely broke. She probably doesn't have a lot of money. So in these 10 coins, we find her savings, her life savings, right? This is what she has, and she loses one. She loses one. 10% of all you have is a lot. It's such a weird story in the Bible because who is the woman in the story? Right? Who's the woman? A poor woman in the Bible who has lost something valuable to her. I don't know if you're like me, I've told you this before, but I visualize things in my head. Every person that I read in the Bible has an image in my head. Are you like that? Okay, so in my head, I've got this image of this woman. You know who I see? I see the old lady at the beginning of Snow White who gives her the apple. You know what I'm talking about? That sweet old lady. I've never seen the second half of the movie, so I'm not sure how it turns out. But that sweet, kind old lady. I'm just joking. This is before it takes a weird turn. So that's who I see looking for this coin. Maybe you don't know what I'm talking about. Just have your own image. But I see this lady looking for this coin. And it's always animated. Does anybody see an animation? Just me too. People are like, man, this guy's so weird. With the grocery shopping that's who I see. Okay, I think that Jesus leaves out so much detail in a lot of his stories. So a lot of it is for us to add in the culture and the government and the conversation. And then some of it I think that Jesus leaves up to our imagination, and I think it leaves room for Jesus to speak into our life. For me, it leaves room to see the lady from Snow White in animation. But that's who I see. I don't know how you are, but I'm terrible at losing things. I'm the worst at losing things, not even for the sake of this parable or this message. I'm so bad at losing things. I lost my car keys for 4 months. I found them like 3 weeks ago in my shoes. I don't know how they got there. I went 4 months having to manually unlock my car because I couldn't find the thing. Terrible at losing things. Shane always thinks that I'm kind of a freak because I'll go to feel my pocket when my car keys aren't there. My anxiety escalates through the roof in the amount of time it takes for my other hand to check my other pocket. You know what I'm talking about? Shane has always seen me go like that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like when you're looking through your stuff. I'm terrible at losing things. I constantly lose things, and I get frantic about it. Weirdly frantic. And I think that that's how this woman is in the story. And I think that that's how God is for the one. If you want to know what God is like, he's like the woman that's frantically looking for a lost coin. I think that God looks at our city, and he is so desperate and longs so badly for the one to come home because he's frantically in love with us. You with me on that? Come on, let's talk about God for a minute. God is frantically in love with us. And he looks at our city, and he looks at our community, and he looks at our family, and so desperately wants that valuable lost thing to find its way home. It goes on, does she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? I don't think she's casually looking at things. I think she's overturning her house. Couches are flipped upside down. She's sweeping out corners looking for this coin. And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." She's frantically looking for this coin. And when she finds it, she calls her neighbors and she says, "Rejoice with me. Rejoice with me, I found the lost coin. 1/10 of everything I own, I have found it." Can you imagine being the neighbor on the other end of the phone at that moment? "Found my coin!" And they're all like, "Great." You know? What do you say if you're the neighbor at that point? It's wonderful. Good for you. Jesus leaves out a lot of detail in his story, right? We assume that there's this silence in the crowd as everybody is listening with this undivided attention. We assume that at the end of this, everybody gets saved. The whole crowd gets saved, and we don't know. That's our assumption, right? In my head, I see the guy in the back that kind of slowly raises his hand, and he's like, yeah, but how much did that party cost? She's throwing this party over this one coin that was, how much did that party cost? Right? I picture this guy quietly reaching up his hand and asking, what's it cost, about $150 for that party? Like, why are we looking for the coin? Just don't throw a party. Call it a wash. But Jesus searches, he finds, and he celebrates. There's nothing more exciting than the find. She may not have been planning a party, but there's nothing more exciting than the find. She may not even been thinking rationally at that point. She's just so excited, so she throws a party. Let me ask you this question, and this is for the Christians. These are the people that follow Christ. You've got a relationship with Christ. Let me ask you this question. And please understand the spirit of this question. It's not to condemn you. It's not to make you feel bad or to shame you. In fact, it's quite the opposite. When was the last time, or have you ever led somebody back to Christ? Have you ever led someone to Christ? Have you ever been with somebody when the coin is found? And I say that to say it's not to shame you, it's not to condemn you. It's to say, have you been there for the find? Because the find is party worth. It's celebration worth. The story could have ended really, really early. Jesus tells his story about the shepherd, and then he says, or suppose that you have a woman. She's got 10 pieces of silver, and she loses one of them. And then he just stops, and the place is silent. And Luke is in the back, like, transcribing, and he's just like, oh, that was it? Right? The story could have stopped at that point, but it doesn't. The story goes on. The story continues. I think it continues so that we can get to the very end, and it says that heaven throws a party. Every week we come in here and we throw a party. I feel like every week we put out promotion for 10 a.m. It's a party. 10 a.m., our service is a party. It's a celebration of the person that's finding hope. It's a celebration of the person that's finding healing when they're hurt. It's the person that's finding life when they're dead. Every week at 10 a.m., we're throwing a party for the person coming back to Jesus. It says, in the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angel and the angels of God over the one sinner who repents. Here's what we have to remember in this celebration. There's rejoicing happening. Heaven is throwing a party. The angels aren't throwing a party. The angels get mentioned in this parable, but the angels aren't throwing a party. The angels were invited to the party that God is throwing. Okay, break down the timeline. Somebody meets Jesus, and God throws a party. God throws a party. The angels are invited to it. God's like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be celebrating the one. Y'all can come with me if you want, but I'm going to be celebrating. The God of the heavens and the earth is celebrating. He's throwing a party for us. That's exciting. The creator of the universe is thinking about us when he's planning his party. Someone finally saw that there's something broken in their spirit, and God is the only one that can put the pieces back together. And God says, that's it. That's the reason why we're doing it. I'm going to throw a party. I'm going to celebrate because that's why we're doing it. You coming back, you realizing that only I can fix it. He looks, he finds, and he celebrates. You know who doesn't get talked about, whose role doesn't get talked about in this story? The coin. You know, the coin does. You know what the coin's role in the story is? Nothing. At no point in this story does it say that the coin did this or the coin did that. I was flipping through the numismatic news this week. And we ever do that? No? Yeah, I literally just heard about it this week too. I was praying to God that it would just roll off my tongue today, and it did. So I'm flipping through the numismatic news. I can't even tell you what it is. I don't know. Sorry, my brain's going crazy right now. So I'm flipping through this thing, it's some sort of blog or newspaper, I don't know. They did this study on coins. They did a study on dirty coins. They took 500 coins and they were trying to figure out how dirty coins were. And they said that for the most part, the metal on the coin is not capable of sustaining dirt and whatever else. Coins are relatively clean. But they took these 500 coins, and what they did find is that E. coli and salmonella can live on a coin for up to 11 days. Okay? 11 days. Let that just marinate in your pocket right now for a minute. Right? Let your imagination run. Okay? I can't wait for offering later. Like, offering's going to be filled with coins. You know what I mean? Like, I've got this image in my head that people are like unloading it, but they're making change as they go. Like, I'm going to put all my coins in, but I'm going to take a 5. You know what I mean? You can unload your coins if you want. The coin is dirty. The coin is very dirty. They can hold the grossest of diseases on them for 11 days. Once 11 days is good. We wash everything. Do you realize that? Everything in our life we wash except our money. Just sick. Tell you what. Don't let your mind wander too far. Here's the thing. The coin is dirty. We are the coin in the story. Right? We're the coin in the story, and the coin is dirty. A lot of times we spend so much time trying to buff out the dent, trying to soak ourselves in disinfectant so that we can be noticed easier. But at no point in the story does Jesus say the coin cleaned itself up so that it could be found by the woman. The woman simply finds it and then celebrates. She finds it and she celebrates. Let me close with this thought. The math in this story doesn't make sense. The math in the story doesn't make sense. Let me return to a previous thought. The guy slips up his hand in the back of the room. He says, yeah, but Jesus, how much that party cost? Like $150? And Jesus is like, interesting that you should ask. Okay, it's a party. She's probably buying wine. She's probably buying food. There's music. There's dancing. There's a very good chance that that party costs a lot more than that coin was worth. But she's celebrating. She's celebrating the loss. That's how you guys need to act on Sundays. Seriously, we are the coin, and you guys are like, yeah! Like, that's how we need to be. I'm preaching over there next week. There's wine, there's food, there's music. The math doesn't quite add up. There's a cost to celebrating the find. The cost for us returning home is that the Son of God came to earth, went up on a cross, brutally beaten, hung up there. He was murdered so that we could throw a party. Come on, let that sink in for just a second. The Son of God came to earth. He was murdered so that we could have a party, so that God could celebrate. The cost is so much greater than we are valued at. The cost is so much greater than we are valued at. The math does not add up. But God cares so much more about the one than he does the $150. Right? Come on, pray for you. Jesus, thank you.